Welcome. So on this gray afternoon, we have gathered here in the beautiful Aula Magna to attend the lectures of another three of this year's laureates, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer. So in October, as you know, the Royal Academy of Sciences decided to award them with the 2019 prize in economic sciences for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce the laureates. First up to the lectern will be Abhijit Banerjee. Abhijit was born in Mumbai, but moved to Kolkata, where he went to school. So with both his parents being professors of economics and India being India, it's perhaps not a great surprise that he would study economics at university. But after undergraduate and master's degrees in Kolkata and in Delhi, Abhijit went on to pursue PhD studies at Harvard. And having held tenure-track jobs at Princeton and Harvard in 1993, he was recruited by MIT, where he has remained ever since. So one remarkable thing about Abhijit's career is the kind of U-turn it has taken in the last 20 years or so. So being predominantly an economic theorist, he started doing more and more empirical research on poverty and development. And this research became more and more based on RCTs, field experiments. So we hope to hear much more about this in Abhijit's lecture, Field Experiments and the Practice of Economics. Please.
Thank you, Torsten. And thank you very much from all of us, the three of us, but also in a sense, the entire community of sometimes what people call the randomistas, who we represent and whose work, in a sense, we build on and benefit from. From all of them to the Nobel Committee and the Nobel Foundation for this great honor, to our friends and family that have come from all over the world for just being willing to be with us at this moment and cheering for us, and to all of you who have come to listen to me. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about, as Torsten said, about the field experiments and the practice of economics. Field experiments, sometimes I'm going to use the word RCT for them. In fact, predominantly, RCTs are randomized controlled trials, and the idea of them is to look at interventions through the comparison of random treatment and control groups, people who are randomly chosen to get an intervention and people who are randomly chosen not to get an intervention, to compare them to know whether what impact that intervention had. This is a very simple idea borrowed from the medical sciences, but one which has its own implementations in the social sciences. In just the community of JPAL, which is our organization, the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, there's about 1,000 of these that have now happened. And what I'm going to speak about is not just our work, but in a sense, little bit of the gleanings from many works of many of those people in that 1,000-person group. And the next talk by Esther and even the talk by Michael will, in a sense, echo very similar themes. And between them, hope we'll give you a sense of where and why the work we've done has been different and possibly important. I'm going to make the claim that RCTs have RCTs, as I said, were these field experiments, have changed economics. And I think they've changed economics in two different ways. One, by changing the day-to-day practice of economics, what we do when we have to answer a question, but also by changing the questions we ask, very different questions. And in those, in a sense, maybe the more profound impact has been that we now think in terms of very different questions, and even the ways we think of what the answers could be are different. And that's maybe the point that is most salient, and I'll try to underscore that as I go through this lecture. In the process, just to make this conversation with economics a bit more salient, I'm going to slightly caricature the practice of economics, because in some ways to explain it in the most nuanced way would take longer than I have. Hopefully you'll forgive me for the caricature. So I think here's, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up as a debate between economics and RCTs. This is not, I mean, when I first started doing RCTs, people would say, that's not uninteresting, but is it economics? And I always sort of struggle to say, what is economics? But I think economics is these things that are meant to be claims, which may or may not, you may or may not always recognize. But I think one of the, and those claims are posited against what RCTs do. So I'm going to try to set up that caricature and then maybe respond to that caricature. So the first general claim that's sometimes made is RCTs are about, you testing the effect of a intervention. You're saying whether changing a particular way of teaching in a school is good or bad. You're not answering generalizable questions. You're not telling us generalizable truths. And that's a claim that is often made. It comes out of a sense that, of course, generalizable truths are what we want. And of course, I mean, people who do RCTs are not entirely stupid, so they also want to have generalizable truths. But we go about it slightly differently. Economics has a specific way of looking for them, which requires, so economics starts with an idea that what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to use the data that we have to infer the deep truths about human behavior. And from those, we will tell you, we'll build a model which will be premised on all these assumptions about human behavior that we're going to make. And from that, we're going to then say, well, the people must have been behaving in this way in order to observe what the data we observed. Once we have that, then we can build from that a story, a model, which would then predict what's going to happen in many circumstances. So it's generalizable through the lens of human behavior. We're going to infer fundamentals about human behavior, and then from that go to generalizability. That requires often having a pretty specific view of human behavior about people wanting mostly money, and people and how markets work. Usually markets will have to work well. So all of those kind of premises then add up to a prediction. What RCTs do is say, let's just start from an idea and let's try it in a few places, and then work backwards towards seeing whether we believe that what the RCT is telling us is actually a generalizable truth, or just something that happens to have happened in one or two places. And I want to give you an example of why these two ways of thinking give you quite different answers. And so these starting from fundamental premises of behavior is in an important and crucial way different from starting from empirical observations and then inferring behavior from those. So here is an example which I'm going to take from a field which gave me my first foothold in economics, the field of what is called social learning, the idea that people learn from each other, and that has a particular pattern and specificity to it. this is, of course, very important in many contexts. If you want to spread a message, you have a serious disease, an infection going on, and you want to contain it. How do you do it? You plant messages about what to do and what not to do. You tell certain people, and you need to know who to tell, and and maybe how to tell them as well. So the question of who to tell has a specific answer within economic theory. Economic theory does answer that question. Once you have, as I said, a model of human behavior, you can use it to make a prediction. And the prediction is typically that you should look for people who are central to a network, people who are connected to connected people. That's the idea that's typically implied by economic models, and it's an idea that you could use. You could go and find those people and tell them, this is the message. Please pass it on. Now those people, of course, have to be found. So you have to know something about the nature of the network. That's sometimes difficult. You need to know who's connected to whom. A very much more empiricist way to go about it, but inspired by maybe a more informal way of theorizing the world, is the idea that you could just ask the members of the social network. You could say, instead of saying, what is the network and then who's central, let's go to the people and ask them, who do you think would be great in spreading a message? So if you ask people that question, what is striking is people give you quite often the same answer. So when you ask them, they say Abhijit, Abhijit, Abhijit. Who is Abhijit? Abhijit is a gossip. So the idea of a gossip, of course, doesn't actually exist in economic theory. It's not an idea that we have any handle on, but it's an idea that people know. They'll tell you who the gossip is. And we could try that. We could seed the gossips. We could tell the gossips what the message is, and we could see where that goes. And if that works, we could try it again, and we could try to learn about that. This is effectively what we did. We did this in 2 experiments, one in the south of India, in Karnataka, where this was for kind of a trivial application. It was for cell phone raffles. We seeded the gossips, we seeded random people, and we seeded important people. And neither random people nor important people do particularly well. Gossips do spectacularly. Gossips are 3 times as good as everybody else in reaching people. Then people, the reaction to that was, well, maybe cell phone raffles are irrelevant because, who cares about them? So we tried to do the same thing about vaccination. And again, we ran a race between randomly choosing to seed gossips versus randomly choosing to seed trusted people or random people. So, again, running a race, and it's an experiment. We ran in randomly chosen villages, we seed the gossip. Randomly chosen villages, we seed trusted people or random people. And when we do that, we find that gossips lead to twice as many kids being vaccinated. So those are enormously consequential results. And what I want to emphasize here is not so much the policy point, but that economic theory would have only got us part of the way there. Why? Because the gossips are indeed central in the network. That's part of the reason why they are good spreaders, because they are central in the network. They're well connected. But they're also much chattier than everybody else. They're just conditional on how central they are. They're much better at spreading the message because they're gossips. They love talking. They go to other people and tell them, do you know what I heard? And that idea is simply very hard to get from the economic theory. The economic theory emphasizes many things, but it doesn't emphasize people's desire to go and share ideas, because there's no benefit to that other than the benefit of sharing. And so the word gossip really doesn't arise in economics. And if we started from a model, we would have never got to the idea of a gossip. And in some sense, the point I'm making, coming back to a generalization, what generalizes from this is a word that would not come out of the economic model. This is the idea of a gossip. The idea of gossip is what is the primary generalized lesson from this experiment. And now we kind of know that gossips are useful. The in that sense, I think one of the ways in our cities are important is they liberate us from using the categories that are dictated by the word economics. So economics is somehow a way of, people are motivated by certain specific things. In a sense, these people were not motivated by those things, or at least that was not what's important, and that this was where our cities helped us. The second criticism of our cities is often that our cities are after small interventions. Economics is about big ideas, bigger growth, instability, capitalism, socialism, all kinds of big stuff. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I agree that economics could be about these things. I am less convinced that economics is very much useful to say about these things, other than, let's say, let's not do what Venezuela or North Korea does. I don't know that we have so much to say about how to stop instability. So I'm less convinced, not about the fact that the question is important, but that we, the contrast of saying we are just solving these big problems, well, maybe, I mean, and you are doing all the small stuff, that seems to me a little bit of a caricature. But also, let me argue that we actually are after big stuff. So here's a question. One of the basic propositions in economics, again, starting from that model, is that making people richer makes them lazier. That's because people love to slack, and having the pressure off, economic pressure off, makes them lazy. Well, how many rich and lazy people do you know? I'll let you think about that. In fact, this is critical because it's a big part of the case against being too generous with poor people. You shouldn't give them too much easy slack because then they'll become lazy. So you should not, give them money because that makes them lazy. So we did actually, one of the nice things about our cities is this is work we did with Rima Hanna and Ben Olken and Gabriel Kreinler. This is about looking at, there were a bunch of our cities where people were given money, and then we looked at what happened to whether they became lazy or not. And while you may want to read what's written in the fine print, the main point is that the two colored bars are identical. Statistically, they're not different, and people don't become lazier when you give them money. There's no evidence that they become lazier. At least poor people don't become lazier when they get money. So that suggests that maybe we shouldn't be so mistrustful of the poor. Maybe we could be a bit more generous to them. So here's an intervention we also studied, which was asking the question, can we be more generous with the poor? Would that be just make them lazy and give up, or would that actually be good for them? This is the study of BRAC's graduation program. BRAC is an NGO in Bangladesh, one of the great NGOs of the world, and they had a program targeted to the poorest of the poor. The poorest of the poor were given a package of some assets, some training, some hand-holding, some temporary cash assistance. All of those. There was RCTs in 7 countries, and there was a durable impact. Durable meaning, I'll tell you, 10 years later, we find that the incomes of the people who were given the assets are higher, so there was no evidence they became richer. They own more assets, they work longer, they're not lazier, they work longer, they earn more, they're happier, healthier. After 10 years, they're about, in India, where we follow them for 10 years, the consumption per head is about 30% higher. Income is 30% higher. That was about what it was all along. Similar results. And indeed, for income, we find that between the 3rd and the 7th year, the impact actually grows. So they actually become, rather than falling back towards poverty, they become more and more dynamic and move away from the others. So that's a sense in which and this is similar results from Bangladesh. Now, that made us ask this question, why is it that this happens? Why? And that goes to one of the fundamental questions, going back to this question of big and small questions. Why are some people so small? And there are really 2 theories. One is that they're born that way. That's, they are somehow not able to stay rich. They spend all their money, they're lazy, they're irresponsible. In that case, if you gave them something, it will go away. The alternative is that they were poor because they are poor, meaning or their parents were poor. They didn't have an opportunity, and if they didn't have an opportunity, there was nothing they could do to get out of there. This was an idea that has been studied for many years. This is the idea of a poverty trap, and it's in fact work that I think got me into being a development economist. 1 minute, 20 seconds of an anecdote about my life. I started, as Torsten said, as a theorist. I wrote a theory paper about poverty traps, and it had the word development in it. So on the strength of that, and having no training and no experience of teaching development, I was offered a job of teaching development at Harvard, and that then led to RCTs and all those other things that I eventually learned, mostly from my students and colleagues. So that's a way in which my life, like the lives of the people I'm describing, a small accident has durable effects. So this is a very nice piece of work, understanding what's going on. Why is it? Why are these people? How do they manage to stay durably rich? I told you that when you give them the asset, they stay durably rich. How does that happen? And this was studied carefully in this very nice piece of work by Claire Balboni, Oriana Bandeira, Robin Burgess, Moitish Ghotok, and Anton Heil. And the point here was to just look at what happens from year to year among people who have a certain level of wealth today. How does their wealth grow? And the point for wealth to be, if a little bit more wealth leads to a lot more wealth tomorrow, then you could imagine people taking off. So a little bit more wealth today leads to a lot more wealth tomorrow, which leads to even more wealth tomorrow, day after, etc. If you have the opposite, so that a little more wealth tomorrow generates only a small amount extra wealth, then that's going to slow down and you'll fall back. The first picture represents the case where people basically can't escape. They're trapped in poverty because there's no escape, because essentially if you give me a little more, maybe I'll eat half of it tomorrow and half of it day after, and then it'll be gone. The other case is where the relationship between wealth today and wealth tomorrow looks like this, an S shape. And in this case, the key idea is that you see that yellow curve suddenly becoming very steep. What that's saying is that a small amount of wealth today actually increases wealth. $1 today gives you $1.50 tomorrow. And therefore, that gives you $2.25 day after, and so on, and that becomes self-sustaining. And to look at which of these curves apply, they actually looked at the data from Bangladesh, from this asset transfer experiment, and they find that this is what it looks like. You can see that the curve looks like an S, like the curve I showed you. And in a sense, what they're demonstrating is that you can actually not only claim that people are just poor because they're poor, and if you give them a push, they'll keep going, but also that you can show that that's in fact the transition. So you can look at that. And this means that essentially people are going to be either sort of just too poor to make it, and then they'll become poorer and poorer, and you see the hump on the left, or they'll become richer and richer, and you see the hump on the left. The middle will empty out, and that's what this picture shows. This is the distribution of productive assets. So you do see exactly the pattern you might have expected. Why is this important? First, because it offers a possibility of a big bang. A small intervention could have big effects on the lives of people. That, of course, is fundamental in a sense. That's fundamental. And, of course, it means that your social return on investment, the fact that if I give people money that has big consequences in people's lives, that's very good news, because you could give a little bit and get a lot for it. But also, what idea is bigger than the idea that the poorest of the poor have enough talent to be self-sufficient, that if you give them a push, they'll stay up? What idea is bigger than that? In a sense, in the realm of big ideas, this is an enormous idea, because it gives us faith in humanity. What could be bigger than that? And the reason why we did an RCT to do this is because we needed to follow people carefully over time to understand what's going on. And to do that, we would need to know who were the people who got the asset and people who weren't. the fact that an RCT gives you a lot of specificity, you can identify the people who should have got it and the people who didn't, and you can follow them over time, means that you can collect data to demonstrate something like this. Without an RCT, it would be much harder to demonstrate. Maybe you could do it, but it would be much harder to demonstrate that there was some dynamic pattern like this. The RCTs give you a very unique kind of data because you know who exactly to follow. And that's the power of that is what this exercise shows. Finally, let me talk the third and last claim or caricature I'll adopt is economics cumulatively builds a theory. RCTs are piecemeal. You do one thing here, one thing there. And again, I want to, obviously, you know by now my trick, which is to controvert this. And I'm going to go into this same story I was following and ask the question, I already told you there's a poverty trap, meaning poor people are poor because they're poor. Why are people poor because they're poor? What is the mechanism? What is making poor people poor? And what would liberate them from their poverty? So one possibility is technology. Maybe they're just too poor to be able to use a good machine, and good machines are necessary to increase your income, and if you don't get the good machine, you'll never get there. The alternative is that it's psychology, that when I give you a boost in your wealth, you just feel liberated from the pressures of life, and that makes you perform. Now, both are entirely plausible, and the graduation program that I told you about, the BRACS program, does both. They give you an asset, and they give you some psychological counseling. So it gives you both, and in a sense, both might be working there. So how do we know that both are important, or are both important? Well, are assets enough? So there's multiple RCTs where people were given lump sum cash transfers, so given cash and you at a bunch of cash, and then you see what happens. Some cases this had big positive effects, some cases it had no effect or no durable effect, and the answers were confusing. So one of the things so are these because these are different people with different aspirations, maybe they're different alternatives, or is it something more about the fact that these are really, if you give people cash, that's not enough, you need to do something else. So one of the things we did in Ghana in work with Dean Carlin, Hannah Trackman, and Chris Udry is we gave some people we gave the graduation program, some people we just gave the assets. And when you just give the assets and not the rest of it, not the hand-holding, you actually find that there is no durable effect. That suggests that the psychology might be important. Moreover, to look deeper into this question, is it psychology? What we did was we then took a next step in that experiment. Some of those people were given there was in the program, in the graduation program, there was some temporary cash support. So you got, before your asset becomes, paying, you got a little bit of extra cash to keep you going till your cow gives milk or you start selling. So we randomized how much that amount was. So we gave them either a small amount or a bigger amount. The idea was the bigger amount, maybe it's not that just takes the pressure off them in the short run. Does that make them more productive? And to know whether we're more productive, we actually ran a bag factory. We produced 117,000 bags in the process. In that bag factory, we could see how productive people were. And first, people who got this graduation program were more productive, even though they had assets and therefore they were busier. They were actually more productive as well. They were working harder at both jobs. The second, if you give them high cash support, they were producing better bags at a faster speed. People just seemed to be much more enthusiastic about what they were doing, and as a result, they were much more productive. So, in a sense, what this says is that at least part of the effect here is the fact that being poor paralyzes people. They feel that there's too much pressure on them, and that pressure makes them less productive. And that's so. I want to say that both as a very important insight into why this economic model that which said that if you give people money they'll become lazy. Well, maybe economic pressure is off, but they're also more enthusiastic, and maybe that's why they're more productive. And in a sense, this is a long tradition of studying this in economics and not so much finding that income makes people lazier, and maybe that's the first RCT that we're aware of is the negative income tax experiment in New Jersey, and this already was finding that the people didn't seem to become lazier when they became richer. So going back to the question now, what did I learn from this that's general or big? I think first thing, RCTs are great for, from the point of view actually of building up a theory. Unlike, I think, the claim that RCTs are about piecemeal, I think they're great precisely because they can be tailored to break up the theory into little pieces. So every piece in the story I was telling, I started by showing you that, when I give people assets, they become more productive, but then why do they become productive? So at each stage, we had a more nuanced hypothesis. First, it was, is it the case that, we do see evidence for a poverty trap? Do we see that S-shaped curve? That's a question we could ask. And then following on that, we could ask, is it enough to give them money, or is it do we need to give them psychological counseling? And then after we thought maybe psychological counseling is important, we asked, is it the case that interventions that just make people more comfortable make them more productive? So all of these steps, in a sense, were important in getting to where we are, where we have some confidence in the idea that people feeling better about their own lives is important for their productivity. This is a process of the theory being tested piece by piece and built up into a narrative. And this is what's nice about an RCT, is that I can design the RCT to answer the specific piece I want to, the intervention I can choose to exactly test the theory I want to test. Something in the world we rarely can do, because in the world things don't actually vary in the way we control. The second, we do not have to do the tests, we don't need to necessarily make a lot of behavioral assumptions. We don't need to assume that people want money. We can test if people want money, or whether they want something else. And the fact that we can test them means a lot of the theory is not tested based on other theories. They're tested based on simply observation or less theory, let's say. And that's also a great advantage of the RCT approach. Finally, you can set up a sequence of experiments in the same location to build up the theories. You can see if the same people treated in different ways give you different outcomes. And that dynamic process gives you a way to test theories bit by bit and build up a story. So in other words, I will end by again thanking all of you. This is just a short list of the people whose papers I talked to you about in detail as we went. There are hundreds and hundreds of others who have simply completely transformed this area. They've taken the idea of RCTs and ran wild in different directions, creating ideas that I think neither Michael nor Esther nor I ever thought of. And that's, I think, the most wonderful thing that's happening to us and to, I think, the field of development economics. And I say with genuine, I think, humility that I think that this is a prize at least as much for all of them as it is for us. Thank you.
Great.